barriers to attaching to God, which then result in, of course, the barriers in mutual attachment in marriage or other intimate relationships. Right. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot, I'll just experientially and in the work that I do with people, there's a lot of those barriers have to do with misunderstanding what's implicit memory and what's current, if that makes any sense. So it's this idea of living in the moment as if all of this stuff that I have actually imported from my implicit memory from my past is here in this moment, but it's actually not here in this moment. Okay. But I'm living as if it is here in this moment. And so that sort of stockpiling all of these moments, which of course trauma has a huge part to play in that, because it's hard to fully process the emotions of trauma without doing intentional work around that. And so just the way that those emotions and all of that implicit memory can be triggered so easily and so quickly, and especially if we're not aware that that's what's happening, then we carry that into, okay, I'm sitting down to pray now, or I'm going on a walk and I'm praying. But then something that I'm seeing on my walk has now flipped me into a different moment, but I haven't realized that I've imported this new moment. And now suddenly my connection with God is lost, and I suddenly assume God doesn't want to hear from me, or I have this sense of God is not present anymore. And I make meaning out of that then of God is not with me. When in reality, what's happened is my nervous system has detected some kind of threat, and I've gone into a protection mode, and I interpret that as God doesn't care. And so I think that dynamic, although it's buried, it's hard to get at it. That to me feels like the bottom of the blockages that we have, or those hurdles to attachment with God. It's just the way that we switch back and forth between connection and protection, and we don't realize when we're in one or the other. And so trying to be connected when everything in our body is screaming, protect, protect, protect. And I think that's probably the biggest barrier that I would summarize to our attachment with God.
Well, that's kind of evidenced. I often think of the story of Adam and Eve and the showcase of the person and the awareness of sin and shame that sets in an immediate hiding. And when I think about it, it's like, okay, there's never a moment in that account where they say to each other, God has been really a great guy so far.
Yeah.
He's been so safe and secure, and he sees us and he knows we're under fig leaves laying in here in the bushes. Let's just go talk to him. Maybe we can say we're sorry. That doesn't even come into their minds, because they go into this place of protection and the perception of their need to protect and their desperate need to protect and not to be culpable for anything. And the pass off of blame. And that's so classic to our struggle. And that is shown first in the Bible to me. The first rupture between God and man. And that's it right there. And then of course the restoration or the repair comes in so many different ways throughout the Bible. We're shown how God is faithful, ever longing for us to come home, or all the prodigals, he's waiting for us to celebrate us. And then, of course, the bridegroom, Jesus, coming for us and promising the future and dying to show us the way. It's so profound.
Well, and you raise a good point there too, because in the garden, Adam and Eve didn't have any implicit memory of God not being available. Their implicit memory was only God being available. But in that moment, they still couldn't access it, because of that feeling of the shame and the threat.
Right.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Get these in so many different ways. Some people have a Santa Claus genie version of God. Some have the angry, precocious God. Some have the big daddy come sit on my lap kind of image of God. And we can get that from our parents, but we can get that from other religious leaders too. And so I guess talk us through how these implicit memories, or even, I guess, perceptions, right? Because it didn't really happen. I believed, or I was told God would be angry, so don't get too close until you get it fixed, because God is so holy, he can't handle your sin was kind of the thing, right? So you got to go kind of get holy again to get back in right relationship with God, or God just gives you everything. If you just pray hard enough and give 10% of your money, you're going to get a new Lamborghini because God loves to give, So kind of talk to us how these things, they're not implicit memory. Where do we get these things from?
Yeah.
How we're these images of God, and then the people of God that we have a relationship with. How does that affect our attachment to God?
Well, there's like layers upon layers. It's really confusing. One, because we can have like an attachment style based off of our family history, but that doesn't necessarily have to match then the ecclesial or spiritual history that we're also in, right? So you could have been raised in an anxious attachment, but then be at a very doctrinally driven kind of angry God desert kind of church, right? So then you have a mismatch. Or you could have the reverse, and then you marry into, you have a family, and then your husband or wife or somebody, like, you end up going to a different church that wasn't really your spiritual heritage, right? So these things, they get layered upon layered. And so our first book, Does God Really Like Me? We kind of, we wanted to map out this kind of, biblical theology of God's presence, which is basically like God delights to be with us and is seeking to offer God's presence to us at all times. And so, which kind of ends up picking at the stories that we get from other kind of spiritual traditions or heritages that we get. And most of that is, it's both explicit, but it's also implicit, because churches are full of nonverbal behavior, undeclared norms, right? So there's always, even in our interpersonal relationships, you have like what's said and what's not said. And churches function that way too. So you could have a church that declares certain doctrine and then functionally acts in a totally different way, right? And if you're around long enough, then you start collecting all that. So I'm basically just saying it's very complicated. I know, Stephanie, I don't, and the other layer then to add to that is they have research that basically says, on our conscious level, we often convert or saved, or we kind of have a spiritual breakthrough in the early portions of our faith journey that compensates for the lack of the attachment. And so, which in one sense is a good thing, where we say, oh, the thing that I didn't get growing up, joyful connection or intimacy or some path toward independence, those things I didn't receive. And so God compensates for that. And you read the Psalms long enough and you're like, yeah, it looks like, David's in distress and he has no one to help him, and God is his shelter and his refuge. And that's good. But then they say that the research also says that deep down in our implicit kind of memories, we slowly start making God look like our implicit attachment system. So if I was raised with kind of angry, distant caregivers, no matter, it takes a lot of work to get out of that. So we're slowly always assimilating God to that. So we have to work. So that's partly why learning these things is really important. So you could start thinking like, am I making God into my own image, or not my image, but my caregiver environment's image? And how do I work against that? And so I think that experience of the environment we were raised in our family of origin, but then also our church environment, there's always this kind of play of how are we moving toward God who's moving toward us, rather than making God into our image. And we always go back, and I'll hand it over to Cyd, just the image of the prodigal son's father. We should call him the prodigal father, as he races out to the son and puts a ring on his finger, gives him a robe again. These are all symbols of just total acceptance back into the family. And I think that is, that's the God we need to be moving toward, away from whatever attachment models may have been given to us or church environments have taught us. But it's rather God's always delighting to be with us, races after us, brings us into the family. And there's roles and responsibilities in the family that we're called to now participate in. But those roles and responsibilities don't make it contingent whether we're in the family or not, right? We're in the family because, of Jesus.
Well, and then you add to all that complexity too, that there's a lot of teachers and pastors who are unaware of their own attachment wounds in history. and declare truth from the perspective that they see the world from, and read the Bible through that perspective and assume that that is the way that the whole world understands things or needs to understand things. And then we have discipleship pathways in communities that are geared toward one particular type of attachment strategy. And then the people who don't fit into that strategy are left going, what is wrong with me? Why does none of this work for me? Why does nothing helping? Which then just continues to exacerbate the insecurities and the frustrations in connection with God. So that's why I have such a huge heart to help get this kind of work in front of pastors and ministry leaders to continue to increase compassionate understanding and a multifaceted approach to discipleship rather than a clear, this is how it's done, which we see often in different church contexts.
By the time this airs, the book that Stephanie and her husband Dan captained, which I'm one of the contributing authors of, is addressing exactly what you and Geoff are trying to do. Is
I love that.
Yeah, opening up the. I'll send you a copy, guys. Thanks.
Oh, awesome! Thank you.
Absolutely.
More books.
So
clearly, we don't have enough.
So when we're beginning to have this dialogue, there right now is a big schism that I'm perceiving in people who are deconstructing their whole experience of Christianity. It's a very big word now, and have been doing so for several years in rebellion at some of the constructs that they don't perceive really do render the relational experience that they would like to be having with God on one level or another, whether it's more touchy-feely emotional or more logic. They're like, wait a minute, what I've been served up isn't what's working for me. And I think about how, and something I actually asked couples to do for homework is to watch the series The Chosen, because I think that it provides a really lovely example of how many different profiles in people, coming from trauma, coming from autism, coming from power and strategy and poverty, are all finding connection with Christ.
Yes.
And how he responds to all of them. What are your thoughts about that kind of a vehicle, which I think is now in like 144 languages internet? I mean, it's an amazing amount. It's funding. This is all crowdfunded. It's going out into the whole world. But like, what are your thoughts about that, or other forms of Christian messaging and the gospel versus what's just coming at you from the pulpit, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll jump onto your affirmation of The Chosen. I think,
absolutely.
I mean, it's such a fantastic, for that reason, because it focuses on Jesus' followers and how they experience Jesus, which I just think is such a wonderfully different approach to Christian media about Jesus than we've had, and exactly the way that they've included the many different backgrounds. So I'm a big fan of things that are well done, things that are easily accessible, and things that are available like that, even outside of it. We hope that our books do these kinds of things too, where helps to change the conversation, add some new understanding, sort of pique curiosity. Yeah, I'm sorry. Your original question was,
what can we as counselors, we're all in this business of counseling, coaching, this is the Coach's Corner podcast. So people listening might be more the professionals and or coaches, or the spiritual pastoral leaders, or biblical people trying to help neurodiverse or other unattached people get attached, to God and better attached to each other. What
I'll jump on real quick, and then Cyd, you can finish it too. Is we use the language of meeting and moving, which is you have to meet people where they are, like where their strength is. So their processing strength, their priorities, their the things that they're naturally good at, and then slowly kind of move them to kind of the other quadrant. And so someone who is like for me, I had to left brain myself into appreciating the right brain, because that was meeting. In a sense, I was meeting myself with my strength, which was, I love to do research. I'm naturally curious about these intellectual things. And it's moving me towards a real embodied, practical valuing of something I didn't used to value, which is I need to value the personal, right? And so like whether it's coaching, pastoral, or a clinical setting for someone in more of the desert, for whom a straightforward, like, let's build more intimacy or social motion, that just creates the walls, right? That's like exhausting. I don't like that. Everyone's always telling me to do that, right? And so instead kind of doing it covertly, which is to do something like collaborative projects. So, well, we have a goal and we're going to work on it together, right? So the togetherness is being built, but it's on the goal, kind of independence, agency, kind of strength that's already there. Or let's research this topic together, right? So you're kind of meeting them and then helping them move forward. Whereas, someone who is, on the anxious kind of side is like just telling them to work on their boundaries, like straight away might be a little intimidating. I don't know, people in my life are going to be upset. Like I can't just, and then they feel bad that they're not keeping boundaries anymore. And now they feel bad about all these things, right? And we don't want that, right? So how do you kind of, help them, value? Actually, Sid, you could probably tell the opposite story, right? But how do you help them? Like, how do you meet them where they are, like valuing people and valuing others, and then kind of grow the seeds of independence or of agency a little bit? Otherwise, we try to get people to do, the hard work too soon, as we're trying to be like, well, you need to round out your weaknesses. And it's like, that is technically true, but that process, we had a saying early on in our marriage, or if it had been early on in our marriage, this would have done wonders for our marriage. I came across this later. I would say that the way I related to Sid might have been technically true, but relationally wrong. Was a phrase that we kind of came up with. Like,
you're like,
argument,
technically I'm right, but relationally I'm wrong.
Like whether it was an argument or scheduling or who was at fault or who knows what, but I'd be like, no, this is exactly what happened. And then I finally had to realize, well, it kind of doesn't matter exactly how it happened because I was wrong in the midst of that process. So technically right, but relationally wrong.
We're writing that one down here because Stephanie are like,
that's one. Say that a lot.
Oh, all right. There we go.
I don't care about the timeline. I don't care if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. What happened to hurt the relationship?
Yeah. And that one has helped us a lot. That because I can even say it to him too. Like, technically you're right. And I don't even have to fill it in because he knows what I mean. But relationally, you're not doing yourself any favors right now.
So winning the argument and losing the battle.
Yeah. Yes. I think one thing that I often do as a coach, as people are trying to shift into, I think this idea of running new experiments is really helpful, because that's what, celebrating every small shift or change, or even thinking about making a shift or a change. Like, if I'm having a conversation with someone and they even entertain an idea that they had not previously entertained, even though they've made no movement on it, I will in that moment go, wow, what a fabulous thought you just had. Do you notice that you wouldn't have had that thought 2 months ago? And just taking a moment to pause and celebrate that, because if they're running new experiments, affirming and giving them data back of like, oh, you're on your way to discovering something, like, keep going. That feels really important to me to do. So I'm always wanting to celebrate that. And people have reported back to me, and I know that that's true in my own life too. When people are celebrating the new experiment I'm trying to run, it just motivates me to want to continue to try out these new experiments, which then helps me collect new data, which helps me formulate new understandings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can you guys tell us about your programs, your classes, materials that people can find?
Sure. Well, I do a 6-week cohort on my own that's called Rooted. And it's the idea of becoming more in touch with our physical bodies, just becoming more aware, because that's often a weakness for a lot of people. A lot of us were either because of trauma or because of not prioritizing, just don't have a good connection with our bodies. And being connected with our bodies is a really good way to start to understand when we're in connection and protection. And then being able to understand, what can I do to get back to a place of connection? So that's a 6-week cohort focusing mostly on being able to stay present in my body and being aware of when I'm connecting and protecting, so that I can make the adjustments I need to make to be able to stay relational in the moment. Then Geoff and I also do a 6-week cohort together, which is the one that Barbara has taken, which is the Attaching to God cohort, where we talk through attachment theory, and then we talk about attachment with God, and we address some of these things that we've talked about today. And we do that with there's both of those cohorts there's pre-recorded video and then live interaction around those videos. And then we've written Does God Really Like Me? Discovering the God Who Wants to Be With Us was our first book, which explores the theme of God's presence with us and God's invitation to join him in his purpose in the world, and which is that 1 and 2 of the 1, 2, 3 of attachment that I mentioned earlier. And then we have a new book that's available for pre-order on Amazon, but it comes out in August, called Landscapes of the Soul. And it's how the science and spirituality of attachment can move you into confident faith, hope, and connection.
Courage and connection. Yeah, there you go. You almost got it from memory. That was
sorry.
good.
It's a long subtitle. I'm still practicing.
Whoa.
So you could throw it. Cyd's site is Holsclaw.com. Cyd with CYD. And then we do our joint work together at embodiedfaith.life. And then we also have our podcast, the Attaching to God podcast, that you can listen to.
And then we're also still currently accepting applications for the next cohort of the spiritual formation and relational neuroscience cohort at Western Theological Seminary. And that can be found at westernsem.edu.
And people
you can tell that we're newly empty nesters with all the stuff that we're doing. We're like, we just got the kids out of the house, so we got to keep busy with other things.
I'm trying to put together a training program that may or may not happen. So there's all sorts of irons.
We love our kids.
If I ever get a doctoral degree, it will be what you guys are offering in Michigan.
Right. We'd love to have you, Barbara.
Awesome. Well, as we are kind of rounding up today, I've just started listening to your podcast because I'm yanking some guests off of them. I'm like, oh, I could have them. Oh, I could have them. That was a great discussion. So thank you all for being on today. Before we end, Barb, do you have any closing thoughts before we close up today?
I think that what the work you're doing is so reflective of course, the 2 greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love others as you love yourself. And of course, we can't love ourselves really well until we understand how much God loves us. So there's this big circle of God loving us, we loving others. It's all that what you're talking about, and that word love is so broad in the United States and the American Western world. But what you are describing is how to put that into experience, into action, into relationship, and into an eternal bond, which we're so grateful for you guys making the time for us today.
Thank you for having us. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Well, as we're closing out today, I want to kind of send a shout out just to, you might be hearing this and being like, well, I'm not a pastor or a religious leader or whatever. And as I'm sitting here reflecting on my biggest church hurts and traumas, it wasn't from the pulpit. It was children's church. It was Christian education as a 1st through 12th grade, very conservative Christian school, Bible teachers, administrators. Like, we all are supposed to be Imago Dei, all reflecting the love of God. And so I think you said it, Geoff, that we could have like amazing parents, but get this other image of how we attach to God from other people in our Christ family, their attachments to God or lack thereof, and what they teach us about God. So I'm thinking like, this is really important. If you are in any kind of ministry, from children to the pulpit or women's groups, like how we teach attachment, our own views, healing from our own wounds, and how we love other people is going to affect every single thing that we do. So I've been like processing all of this while we've been talking. So it's been a great discussion. But listeners, we always like to remind you that there is hope for your future, and you're not alone on this journey.